Lieutenant Mason Rourke had never liked derelict ships, especially ones floating lifeless in the dark between stars. But orders were orders, and the shattered alien dreadnought named Valshara loomed ahead like the bones of a giant creature. Its hull was cracked and scorched, torn apart in ancient battles long before humanity had even reached the stars. The salvage crew had already pulled weapons, tech cores, and rare alloys from the wreck, but Mason had been assigned to check the sealed lower decks sections untouched by previous teams because of unstable energy fields and failing gravity. Armed with a pulse rifle and his suit's limited oxygen, Mason floated into the gloom, passing broken corridors filled with drifting debris and scorched alien symbols he couldn't read. The silence pressed on him deeper than anything he did. Felt in space before, not dead silence, but the kind that felt like it was listening. He moved slowly, every sound of his boots against metal echoing too loud. Then his scanner beeped faint life readings just ahead. Impossible. No one and nothing had survived on this ship for centuries. He followed the signal, passing a collapsed bulkhead, then a narrow passage that opened into a large chamber untouched by fire or decay. In the center stood a stasis pod tall, crystalline, and faintly glowing with inner light. And inside it was a figure, a woman, alien, tall, elegant, with silver-blue skin and a crown-like pattern of glowing lines on her forehead. Her eyes were closed. Her arms crossed gently over her chest. She looked peaceful. Mason stared, unsure what he was seeing. He didn't move. The scanner confirmed it again, life signs stable, but barely. This wasn't a corpse, it was a living being. Mason hesitated. Protocol said he should report it and wait. But something, curiosity, instinct, maybe something deeper, made him move closer. He placed a gloved hand on the surface of the pod. The glow brightened and the lines on her skin pulsed. Then, without warning, her eyes opened. They were bright, shimmering with colors he couldn't name, and they locked directly onto his. He stumbled back, heart hammering. She didn't speak. She didn't scream. She only looked at him and smiled. A calm, soft smile that didn't match the wreck around them. Mason couldn't explain it, but the smile unnerved him more than any threat would have. He'd seen war, monsters, pirates, but nothing like this. She stood inside that coffin of crystal, surrounded by the death of her people, and smiled at him. Why? Who was she? Before he could think more, a sharp beeping interrupted his thoughts. Hostile drones had activated somewhere in the ship. Big, old. Defense systems, waking up. His HUD lit up with red markers. Movement, fast, closing in. Mason had to make a choice. Leave her and get out alive, or risk everything to bring her with him. There was no way to open the pod easily. It had alien locks. But then she raised her hand inside the glass, palm outward. The pod responded, unfolding with a hiss and a soft blast of cold air. She stepped forward, unsteady, her feet touching the deck as if she hadn't walked in centuries. Mason offered a hand. She took it. Her skin was cold, smooth, and strangely warm all at once. No words passed between them. Just that strange understanding, or maybe curiosity, that bound the moment. The red lights on his HUD flashed brighter drones, entering the room. He raised his rifle and fired at the first one that darted through the doorway, shattering its shell with a burst of plasma. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted her hand, and with a flick of her fingers, a pulse of blue light rippled out, shorting 2 more drones in midair. Mason blinked, stunned. She didn't need saving. She was powerful. But she'd let him find her. Why? Together, they fought their way through the collapsing corridors, Mason shooting and guiding her, while she bent energy and systems to clear their path. The ship was crumbling, reacting to their escape. Explosions lit the halls behind them. At last, they reached the airlock where Mason's shuttle clung to the wreck. As they entered, the woman paused, turned to look back at the ruined ship, then looked at him once more and smiled again. That same quiet smile that made no sense. It wasn't gratitude or relief. It felt older, like she knew something he didn't. They blasted free of the Valshara just as its reactor went critical, a white flash filling the dark. Back on the human corvette Calypso's Edge, the crew stared in silence as Mason led the alien woman aboard. No one spoke. The woman didn't speak either. She only looked around, absorbing every detail of the ship, the people, the colors. And then she looked at Mason again and smiled, as if they shared a secret. He didn't understand. Not then. But something had begun in that wreck. Something ancient. Something human. And he knew, deep in his gut, that this was just the beginning. Back aboard the Calypso's Edge, the alien woman sat quietly in the observation bay, watching the stars through reinforced glass, as Lieutenant Mason Rourke stood nearby, still unsure what to say or do next. She hadn't spoken since they escaped the shattered dreadnought, but her presence was impossible to ignore. Graceful, calm, and always watching, especially him, with that soft, unreadable smile that had followed him. From the ruins, Dr. Aria Vega, the ship's top linguist and xeno-specialist, had rushed to examine the strange patterns the alien had drawn on a datapad Mason gave her looping, glowing shapes that shimmered slightly even after they were written, as if alive and after hours of study and referencing old archives from pre-galactic collapsed civilizations, Vega found something unexpected. The patterns weren't just symbols. They were a name, or at least the root of one, matching the style of a lost race known in scattered records as the Valunari, a race long thought extinct, known only through fragments of myth and broken tech found across ancient ruins. The name she wrote was Sarayan, and when Vega said it aloud near the alien, the woman lifted her head for the first time, eyes glowing faintly, and touched her chest, as if confirming it. Sarayan, last of a forgotten empire, now aboard a human scout vessel that had no idea what it had truly found. Mason listened to Vega's explanation, but his focus kept drifting back to Sarayan. Why him? Why had she smiled at him from the start? And why had she reached for his hand in the wreck? The rest of the crew was unsettled, respectful but nervous, some whispering that she might be dangerous, a sleeper agent, or worse, a weapon left over from some ancient war. But Mason didn't feel fear from her. Instead, he felt a strange calm, like she was waiting for something or someone, and had finally found it. Days passed slowly, and still she didn't speak, but she walked the ship's halls now, often stopping to watch crew members work or to stare at simple things, steam from a cup, a child's drawing on a wall screen, the way 2 engineers laughed at a joke, always studying, always quiet. And Mason began to realize that maybe it wasn't just curiosity, Maybe she was trying to remember something, or learn how to be in this new world. Then, without warning, a proximity alert blared across the ship. The Tarshik Authority vessel Krovin's Watch had dropped out of warp, an old warship with blackened hull plating and no reason to be this deep in neutral space, and it hailed them with a sharp, cold message: surrender the alien. Passenger or be destroyed. Captain Harlow demanded answers, but the Tarshik officer on the other end only said that Sarayen of the Winunari was a classified threat, marked for retrieval or termination, and gave them 10 minutes to comply. In the command center, Mason felt a chill run down his spine. How did they know her name? And why did they want her now after all these centuries? Sarayen, standing nearby, made no move to hide or run. She only looked at the screen, as if seeing something old and expected, then walked over to the navigation table and pointed to a system several light years away, one marked only as E-17, an uncharted area rumored to hold ruins from the pre-collapse era. She tapped it twice, then looked at Mason, her eyes serious now, the smile gone, and he understood she wanted to go there, needed to, and it might hold the truth of what she was and why she had survived. Captain Harlow hesitated, torn between orders and instinct, but when Mason vouched for Sarayen, the captain made her choice. Calypso's edge, turned and jumped to warp, fleeing the Tarshik ship just seconds before incoming fire would have shredded them. The pursuit began, and across the next day, the Tarshik ship followed them through gravitational mazes and debris fields, always just behind, always just out of firing range. During that time, Vega and Mason worked with Sarayen to understand. More through careful gestures and symbols, they learned that she wasn't a soldier or a ruler, but something else, something more symbolic. Sarayen was a key, a living conduit to something ancient left behind by the Volunari, something her people called the Harmony Engine, meant to bring peace through shared resonance across species, but it had never been activated because the galaxy fell into war before her mission began, and she was placed in stasis, hidden inside the Valshara until the time was right. And now, with wars brewing again and tensions between species rising, the Tarshik wanted to stop it before it started. They feared unity more than chaos, and Sarayen's very existence was a threat to their power. When Calypso's edge reached the edge of System E-17, they found a dead star surrounded by broken satellites and one massive ring structure, floating lifeless but intact, a perfect circle of stone and steel and light, untouched by time. And as they approached, Sarayen stood, tall at the viewport, eyes glowing brighter than ever before. Mason watched her, heart pounding, knowing now that they were caught in something far greater than a simple salvage run, something ancient, something that had waited across centuries for someone to find it. As the ship prepared to dock with the ring, another alert rang out. Tarshik forces had followed them through a hidden jump gate, and now the clock was ticking. Mason suited up, pulse rifle ready, Sarayen beside him as they made their way toward the surface of the ancient ring, unsure what they would find, but knowing that whatever it was, it might change the future of the entire galaxy. And in that moment, as the airlock opened and they stepped into the unknown, Sarayen looked at Mason again, and that strange smile returned, not soft this time, but certain, like she knew something he still didn't understand, and it chilled him even more than the silence of space ever could. The surface of the ancient ring world felt like stepping onto the edge of a forgotten dream, silent, gray and impossibly vast, with smooth metal pathways that stretched in perfect curves beneath a sky filled with drifting stars and the glow of the dead star overhead. Mason Rourke moved carefully beside Sarayan, pulse rifle ready, though no enemies had shown themselves yet, and the place felt more like a tomb than a battlefield, but something in the air made his skin crawl like the ring itself was watching him. Behind them, Captain Harlow stayed aboard Calypso's edge, preparing for a fight if the Tarshik ships tried to land, while Dr. Vega monitored from orbit, tracking strange energy readings that had begun to pulse from the ring's center. The moment Sarian set foot on it, the deeper they walked, the more the structure changed. Gray metal became smooth crystal, and glowing lines lit up beneath Sarian's feet, following her like a trail bright and alive. And though she still had not spoken, Mason felt her urgency in every step she took, as if they were being pulled toward something important, something ancient that had waited too long already. They reached a large chamber deep within the ring, a circular hall with massive pillars and a domed ceiling covered in star-like patterns that shimmered softly. When Sarayan stepped inside, at the center was a pedestal, and upon it floated a small glowing shard, spinning slowly and humming with low, deep sound that Mason felt more than heard. Sarian reached out to it, and as her fingers brushed its surface, the chamber-changed walls flickered with holographic scenes from the past, great cities in the sky, beings of light and metal working together, and then war, fire, shadows, and tire, worlds burning, and a final desperate attempt to hide something powerful before it was all lost. The shard showed the rise and fall of the Valonari, their dream of unity, crushed by fear and violence, and Sarian at the heart of it, not a queen, not a warrior, but a guardian chosen to carry the last piece of their vision to the future. Mason watched in awe, unable to speak, and when the images faded, Sarian turned to him with eyes full of sorrow, and for the first time she spoke, her voice soft and musical, though filled with weight. It must not end again. Before Mason could ask what she meant, the ground shook beneath them, and alarms blared in his helmet. The Tarshik had landed, and a dropship was descending fast, weapons hot, and moving straight toward their location. Sarian moved quickly, touching another panel that opened a hidden path downward, deeper into the heart of the ring, and Mason followed without hesitation, trusting her now more than he trusted his own orders. They moved through glowing corridors and rooms filled with long-dead machines, passing strange symbols that lit up as Sarian passed, and at last reached a chamber unlike the others, massive, circular, with floating platforms around a central core that pulsed like a beating heart, the so-called harmony engine now stirring back to life. But they weren't alone. The Tarshik team arrived moments later, armored soldiers led by Commander Vesk, a tall, scarred officer with cold eyes, and a voice like stone, who ordered Mason to step away from the alien and surrender her at once. Mason refused, raising his rifle, but Vesk laughed coldly, telling him he had no idea what Sarian really was, that she wasn't just a key, but a signal, a beacon, and if activated, she would awaken not just the machine, but the memory of her people, echoing through the minds of every sentient being in range, binding them together whether they wanted it or not. Sarian said nothing, only stepped forward to the platform, And Mason realized a truth. She wasn't just trying to share peace. She was trying to prevent extinction, because somewhere deep within this system or another, something worse than the Tarshik was coming, something she had seen before, something that had destroyed her kind, and the Harmony engine was the only hope left to unite a broken galaxy. Vesp fired first, but Sarayan raised her hand, and a wave of energy bent the shots away harmlessly. Mason opened fire in return, taking cover behind ancient machines as the chamber erupted in chaos blasts flying, lights flashing, the engine pulsing louder with each second. Sarayan stepped into the center of it all, calm, radiant, her body glowing with energy as she began to merge with the machine, her voice echoing now in Mason's mind as much as in his ears, speaking words in a language he didn't know, but somehow understood, words of hope, of memory, of connection. The Tarshik soldiers faltered, holding their heads as visions filled them, two images of lost children, burned cities, shared pain, and a strange, overwhelming sense of oneness, as if the walls between minds were thinning, crumbling. Vesp screamed in fury and charged forward, blade drawn, but Mason met him head-on, the two men clashing in the flickering light of the chamber, while the world around them changed. The fight was brutal, fast, and Mason barely survived, bruised, bloodied, but standing as Vesk finally fell, stunned by a final burst of energy from the engine that knocked him out cold. And then silence broken only by the low hum of the Harmony engine, now fully awake, its glow soft and warm, no longer pulsing with danger, but with quiet strength. Sarayan stood in the center, changed, her body semi-transparent, her form now part of the machine. No longer fully flesh, no longer just one person, but something greater, something made of memory, light, and purpose. She turned to Mason one last time and smiled again, not with mystery, but with peace, and spoke softly. "You remembered us." Then she was gone, her body fading into the engine, leaving only the shard on the pedestal, now dim and silent. Mason picked it up, feeling the warmth of her still inside it, and knew the war wasn't over, but something had changed, something deep. And when he returned to Calypso's edge, he looked at the stars not as cold threats, but as places where her message might one day reach. And far behind them, the ring world spun silently, not just a ruin now, but a beacon of hope waiting for those who dared to listen. The stars outside the window of Calypso's edge looked the same as always, cold, distant and silent, but to Mason Rourke they now felt different, like they were watching, listening, maybe even remembering. Since leaving the ring world behind, the crew had been quiet, as if still trying to understand what had happened. Sarayan was gone, not dead, not lost, but changed, part of something vast and ancient now, and Mason couldn't shake the memory of her final smile, soft and knowing, like she had seen everything that was coming and had accepted it. The shard she left behind stayed with him, cool to the touch, and sometimes warm, pulsing faintly when he held it alone, like a heartbeat waiting for something. Dr. Vega ran every test she could, but the shard resisted all scans, giving only low musical hums that didn't match any known frequency, and she began to believe it was more than a message or relic, maybe even a kind of seed carrying Sarayan's essence or the blueprint of the Harmony engine's purpose. Orders came from Earth Command within days. Mason was to report for full debrief, and the shard was to be secured at Lunar Research Station Theta, a facility known for handling untech. But something about the way the order was written felt wrong, too forceful, too fast, and Captain Harlow noticed it too, choosing to delay the jump for repairs while they scanned local channels for chatter. That's when they heard the whispers, small colonies vanishing without distress calls, ships found adrift with no crew, just faint echoes in their black boxes of strange lights and silence before everything went dead. The name Sarian began to appear on old data relics found near the ruins, and though Mason knew it couldn't be her doing, others might not see it that way. Worse, unknown vessels were being spotted near the edges of human space dark, silent ships that didn't answer hails drifting in and out of sensors like ghosts, and one by one the outer systems stopped responding. Mason stood alone in his quarters, the shard in his hand, trying to listen, hoping for anything, but only the silence between stars answered back, and in that silence he began to dream. Dreams of vast halls filled with voices not his own, of cities in the void lit by blue fire, and always that same voice whispering softly in the distance, "It is not over." Vika believed the shard was reaching out, trying to connect with someone or something, maybe other Harmony engines left across the galaxy, maybe Sarian herself, but the more it pulsed, the more danger seemed to draw near, and Mason could feel it in his bones, like the calm before a storm. Then came the signal, faint and broken, from an old listening post near the Cassidian drift. 5 words repeated again and again. "They are inside the light," followed by screams and then silence. Mason knew they couldn't ignore it, and against Command's orders, Captain Harlow diverted the Calypso's edge to investigate, unwilling to send anyone else blindly into whatever had come out of the darkness. When they reached the listening post, it floated dead in space, its outer hull scarred by something sharp and fast, but not explosive like it had been sliced by light itself. Inside, no bodies, no signs of struggle, only the flickering of lights, and systems that blink in strange patterns, like a language trying to write itself across broken screens. Vika stared at the logs, trying to decode them, and Mason wandered the halls alone, hearing whispers that shouldn't exist in vacuum-sealed corridors, soft voices speaking his name in Sarian's, but when he turned, no one was there, only shadows and the steady hum of power trying to stay alive. They found one survivor hidden deep in the engineering deck, a young technician named Enric who had sealed himself inside a maintenance crawl space, half mad with fear and covered in strange. Lines burned into his skin, glowing softly, just like the shard. He kept repeating. She tried to stop it. They didn't listen. "The gate is open," over and over. And when Vika tried to calm him, he looked straight at Mason and whispered, "It knows your face," before slipping into unconsciousness. Mason didn't know what gate he meant or what it was that knew him. But as they left the listening post and returned to the ship, the shard pulsed again, bright and hot, like it had been woken from a deep sleep, and for the first time it projected something, a star map, unfamiliar and distant, pointing toward a sector long marked as unexplored, lost behind gravitational storms and ancient debris fields, where even probes rarely returned. Vija believed the shard was calling them there, and Mason felt it, too. A pull in his chest like gravity, made of memory, and though Harlow warned it could be a trap, the decision was made, and Calypso's edge turned toward the unknown. As the stars shifted, and the ship moved into darker space, Mason looked out the viewport, wondering what waited beyond the silence, what Sarayan had meant when she said it must not end again, and if this was what her people had seen before their fall. And as the jump drive charged, the shard in his hand whispered one word in a voice that was no longer just hers, but many layered together: awakening. The moment Calypso's edge dropped out of jump, near the coordinates revealed by the shard, the crew knew they had entered a place that should not exist, a system with no name, hidden behind collapsed gravity wells and forgotten in every known star chart, where the laws of space felt twisted, stretched, and wrong. The stars here were dim and flickering like dying candles, and the central world, massive, broken, wrapped in fragments of its own shattered moon, glowed with a strange blue aura that pulsed like breath, steady and deep. The planet was surrounded by wreckage of ships from dozens of species, some ancient beyond recognition, all caught in slow orbit, like rusted bones. And though no life signs showed on scans, the shard pulsed stronger than ever, guiding Mason Rourke's hand toward the broken world below. Captain Harlow was uneasy but trusted Mason's instincts, and soon Mason, Dr. Vega, and a small team descended in a shuttle, landing on a surface that looked more like a grave than a world. Endless plains of obsidian dust, with towering crystal towers rising like frozen screams, cracked and leaning, casting long shadows under a sky split by lightning that made no sound. As they moved forward, the shard lit a path, each pulse activating strange patterns beneath their feet, revealing old roads, half-buried symbols, and tall statues of beings long gone, elegant and alien, but some bearing a face Mason recognized too well: Sarians. It became clear this was once a Volunari capital, a seat of power and memory, and now only echoes remained, deep within the bones of this lost city. They reached a great hall carved into the heart of a mountain, its doors opened by the shards. Light, and inside they found the crownless throne, a floating platform surrounded by columns of crystal, each one flickering with scenes from the past: war, peace, betrayal, flight, and a final desperate effort to lock something away, something massive and ancient that pulsed in the dark just beyond the edge of understanding. The throne itself stood empty, but above it hovered a great sphere of energy, cracked and unstable, surrounded by voices whispering across time, fragments of thought from Volune minds, long faded words in languages lost, crying, pleading, warning. Mason approached slowly, drawn by something deeper than curiosity, and when he touched the edge of the platform, the shard leapt from his hand, rising into the sphere and fusing with it, creating a shock wave of light that swept through the chamber and woke the ghosts asleep in the stone. Visions flooded Mason's mind: Sarayan standing on that very throne long ago, a council before her, arguing, fearful, desperate, and beyond them all, in the void between galaxies, a presence growing, feeding on isolation, thriving in silence. Something the Volunari had tried to warn the younger races about, but had failed, because their own unity had collapsed first. Mason saw the truth. The shard wasn't just a memory or a key, it was a part of the crownless throne, a throne meant not to rule, but to connect, a last tool built to unify voices across light years and hold back what waited in the dark. And Now that it had returned, the throne stirred again, its energy stabilizing, its signals reaching out, but it was too late to be unseen, for something ancient had felt the pulse, and in the orbit above, Calypso's edge went dark for 7 full seconds. When Harlow got systems back online, the stars were wrong, and a massive shape drifted beyond the moons, like a ship, but not a ship, no engines. No lights, just dark, moving angles and impossible geometry that didn't obey logic, and no one could look at it for long without pain. The crew on the ground felt it too, like pressure in their skulls, and Dr. Vega collapsed, nose bleeding, whispering, "They found it. They're coming through." Mason stood on the platform unsure what to do when Sarian's voice echoed again, not in the chamber, but in his mind, strong and calm. "You must sit, Mason, you must become." He didn't understand, but his body moved anyway, stepping toward the throne as lights rose from the floor, surrounding him in a cocoon of warm energy, lifting him gently, and in that moment he felt her presence beside him. Not a ghost, not an echo, but a presence living and aware, watching and guiding. The platform accepted him, lines of golden light rising around his limbs, and the energy sphere began to respond, stabilizing fully, pulsing in rhythm with his own heart, and the whispers turned into voices clear now, full of strength and sorrow. And hope, not just Velunari, but others, voices from other fallen peoples, other forgotten places, joining through the throne as it linked their thoughts across time and space. Above, the great shape turned slowly toward the planet, reacting to the throne's activation, and tendrils of light reached out from its form, not like weapons, but like fingers searching for something to silence. The team rushed to defend the chamber, but their weapons were useless against what approached, and only the throne's light kept the fingers at bay, burning them where they touched the floor. Mason felt pain but held on, channeling every memory of Earth, a people laughing, building, fighting for each other, and that human stubbornness gave the throne new shape, new energy, fusing Velunari design with human will, something new, something unpredictable, something alive. Then the shard spoke through him, through all the light. "This is not a weapon. This is a bond," and the throne sent out a pulse, one so strong it reached systems light years away, triggering dormant shards, waking old relics, and beginning to reweave what had once been broken. The dark presence recoiled, twisted, and faded back into the void, but not destroyed, only delayed, and Mason knew it would return stronger. As silence returned, the lights dimmed, and the platform lowered him gently back to the ground, leaving the shard once again in his hand, now different, etched with new patterns, new meaning, and humming with quiet strength. Sarian's voice whispered once more, "The throne has a heart again, but the war has only begun." And as Mason looked up at the stars, no longer silent but filled with the distant song of returning connections, he knew he had become something. More than soldier, more than messenger, he had become part of a legacy older than memory, and the crownless throne would never be empty again. Mason Rourke stood beneath the broken sky of the lost world, the shard warm in his hand and the echoes of Sarian's voice still fading in his mind. But the silence didn't last long. Within hours of the throne's awakening, signals from deep space began to light up again, shards across distant colonies flickering to life, strange relics humming with new energy, and voices long silent, beginning to speak as one. Across human space and beyond, people were hearing whispers and dreams, soft pulses in their minds calling them to remember, to connect, to stand. But the dark thing that had reached for the throne had not left completely. It lingered just beyond. The edge of space, vast and waiting, feeding off fear and division, and Mason knew the next time it came, it would not test or probe, it would consume. As the Calypso's edge rose from orbit and rejoined the fleet gathering near the neutral colonies, Mason became something different, no longer just a soldier or envoy, but a living part of the Harmony engine, a voice for the throne, and though he didn't feel stronger, people listened when he spoke, because the shard carried more than energy now. It carried the will of thousands who once stood against the dark and were ready to try again. With the help of Dr. Vega and Captain Harlow, Mason reached out to human leaders, Varnai diplomats, Kenari archives, even the scattered remnants of the old AI collectives, and all began to see what the throne truly was: not a weapon to hold or control, but a mirror and a bridge meant to unite, to resist not through fire but through shared light. The news spread faster than governments could stop it, and soon ships from every side began to gather, not for war, but for something older. Defense through understanding, shields made from voices in unison. But even as this alliance formed, the enemy moved a hole, opened in space beyond the fringe, not a wormhole, not a portal, but a tear, and from it spilled silence, the kind that kills thought and turns unity to ash. Dozens of systems went dark in a single day, and when probes returned, they showed cities frozen mid-movement, people standing like statues, their minds wiped clean, their memories taken, like something had reached in and pulled the soul from everything. Fear threatened to shatter the alliance before it could even form, but then the shard pulsed again, and Mason stood before them, all projected through every channel, every station, the shard's light forming a halo around him, and he spoke, with words not just his own, but from every voice the throne remembered, calling them not to arms, but to remember what it meant to be more than one, to be together, to resist by standing side by side. The fleet moved at last, not to attack, but to build a wall of light near the edge of the tier, using the Harmony frequency to reinforce shields and protect memory, forming the first real stand in a war that had started before history began. And as the enemy appeared, shapes of shadow and angles, twisting through space like nightmares given form, the alliance held, barely, every ship straining, every mind pushing against the pressure, the shard in Mason's chest glowing brighter with each moment. The throne's energy surged through him and across the fleet, allowing thoughts to pass from ship to ship without words, letting a pilot on Earth feel the fear of a Kenari scout, letting a human medic hold the sorrow of a Varnai soldier, and somehow that shared pain became strength. But even then it wasn't enough. The enemy reached the center line, pressing closer to the throne's frequency core, and Mason knew if it fell, all would be lost. He reached into the shard deeper than ever, calling out not with power, but with memory, and he thought of her Sarian, the way she had looked at him when all hope had been gone, the way she had smiled not with fear, but with peace, as if she had already seen this moment and trusted him to stand. The shard pulsed one last time, and then her image appeared beside him, not a ghost, not a dream, but a perfect light-formed projection woven from the throne's memory, and she turned to face the enemy without flinching. Her smile was the same, soft, calm, not proud, not afraid, just real, and for a moment the enemy paused, the silence faltered, and Mason understood it was not power the enemy feared, but unity, the kind that came from trust so deep it couldn't be taken or copied. Sarian's smile was not a weapon, but a signal, a memory of peace so strong it burned brighter than hate, and the shard echoed it across the fleet, across the galaxy, reminding everyone of why they had come, why they stood, and what they refused to forget. In that moment the throne surged with full light, no longer just defending, but reaching into every forgotten place, every shadowed ruin, awakening voices that had been lost for centuries, and the enemy screamed, not in sound, but in waves, of darkness that recoiled from the light. Ships that had fallen dead rose again, minds restored, memory returned, and the Alliance pushed forward not to destroy, but to hold, to protect, to remember. As the tier in space closed, sealed by the full activation of the Harmony engine, the enemy scattered, not gone, but driven back into the silence that had made it, and Mason collapsed, the shard cooling in his hand, the last whisper of Sarian's voice wrapping around him like a farewell hug. You were never alone. When he awoke, days had passed, the fleet was safe, the throne stable, and though the price had been high, the galaxy had changed, not with conquest, but with a smile. Mason returned to Earth not as a hero, but as a bridge, and though he never fully understood why Sarian had smiled at him that day on the ring world, he now knew what it had meant. It was hope, passed from one soul to another, silent, honest, and unbreakable, a human feeling the enemy could never steal. And in the years that followed, as new connections formed, new alliances grew, and children learned not just of Earth or Velunari, but of both, the galaxy remembered not the battles, but the moment it stood still and smiled back and was saved.